The freezing river swallowed Ryan in seconds, his hands thrashing once before vanishing under the dark water. Aaliyah didn't think. She threw her backpack down and dove straight in. Her breath exploded on impact. Her chest locked with cold, but she kept swimming toward the sinking shadow until she heard a woman scream from the shore. "Don't touch him! Get away from my husband." If this already made your blood boil, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss stories where justice finally wins. Aaliyah's fingers burned as they closed around Ryan's jacket. The current dragged both of them sideways, waves slapping against her face, but she kept pulling him up, gasping for air. His body was limp, heavy, too heavy for a girl her size, but she refused to let go. Her arms trembled as she dragged him toward the muddy bank. The cold carved through her bones like glass, her breath shaking, but she dug her knees into the dirt and pulled until his head finally broke free from the water. "Come on," she whispered, pressing her hands to his chest. "Don't die on me." She pushed. 1, 2, 3. He coughed. Water burst from his mouth, and his eyes fluttered open, dazed, unfocused, alive. Aaliyah collapsed onto her side, shivering, clutching her bruised leg. Relief washed over her, until she heard heels pounding across the ground. Brooke sprinted down the slope, her hair whipping behind her, her pearl necklace bouncing like she'd run a marathon. She dropped beside Ryan and grabbed his face with shaking hands. "Ryan! Oh my God, Ryan!" Then her eyes snapped toward Aaliyah. "What did you do to him?" Aaliyah blinked, stunned. I pulled him out. He was drowning." "You expect me to believe that?" Brooke snarled, standing tall over her. "Look at you. Look at your hands. You think you can fool me?" Aaliyah tried to step back, but her injured leg gave out. Brooke stepped closer. "You touched him without permission? Who do you think you are?" Ryan struggled to sit up, voice hoarse. "Brooke, stop!" She didn't. She slapped Aaliyah so hard the sound cracked through the air. Aaliyah stumbled, fell to her knees in the mud, her cheek burning. "I saved him," she whispered. "I was trying to help." Ryan coughed again, breath shallow. She saved my life." Brooke froze, but her eyes, cold sharp, didn't soften. Not even a little. And Aaliyah realized the truth. Saving a man's life didn't matter. Not when the girl saving him looked like her. Brooke's accusation echoed to the riverbank, but what struck Aaliyah wasn't the slap. It was a look in Ryan's eyes. He wasn't just scared. He looked like a man hiding something heavier than the water that almost killed him. If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe. Aaliyah pressed her palm against her injured leg, trying to steady her breath. The cold had already sunk deep into her bones, but Brooke's glare felt worse, sharp enough to cut through the wet layers on her skin. "Don't move," Brooke barked at her, even though Aaliyah could barely stand. "Ryan is already weak, and now we have to deal with this?" Aaliyah tried to swallow the sting in her throat. "I didn't hurt him. I swear. I only saw him fall in. You were waiting," Brooke snapped, "lurking by the water. People like you always want something." Ryan winced, clutching his ribs. "Brooke, stop. She didn't do anything wrong." Brooke ignored him completely. The distant wail of sirens began to rise through the trees. Aaliyah exhaled shakily, relief mixed with dread. She knew how this usually went. The one who looked dangerous always ended up explaining themselves the most. Ryan tried to sit up again, his movement slow, deliberate, almost painful. He reached toward Aaliyah but stopped halfway, his hand trembling. "Don't touch her," Brooke snapped. "Ryan, she could have been the one who pushed you. You don't know anything." Ryan's eyes flicked toward Aaliyah again, softer this time. "Brooke, she saved me. Let them handle it." Aaliyah saw it clearly now. Fear, yes, but something else. Something he didn't want Brooke to see. Something he wasn't saying out loud. She whispered, "You fell. I saw you slip off the boat's edge. You didn't jump. You didn't." Brooke's head whipped around. Enough. Not another word from her. Aaliyah's chest tightened. Why did Brooke shut her up so fast? Why did Ryan avoid her eyes when she mentioned the fall? The ambulance pulled up, tires grinding against gravel. 2 medics rushed down, splitting instantly, one toward Ryan, the other toward Aaliyah. "This girl's injured," the medic said, kneeling beside her. "Leg trauma, possible cut, should be fine." Brooke cut in, "Focus on my husband." The medic didn't listen. "Miss, can you stand?" Aaliyah shook her head. I don't think so." Ryan's voice cracked. "Take her too." Brooke spun toward him, shocked. "Why?" "She's just—" Ryan stared at Aaliyah again, something heavy and unspoken in his eyes. "She saved me," he said quietly, "and I don't want her left alone." And suddenly, Aaliyah realized Ryan wasn't just grateful. He was scared of something else entirely. The hospital lights felt too bright, too white, too sharp against Aaliyah's eyes as the medics rolled her inside. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, each step sending a pulse of pain through her leg. She wasn't used to rooms like these, rooms that smelled like bleach and money. Ryan was wheeled in beside her, still wrapped in an emergency blanket. Brooke followed close behind, arms crossed, jaw tight enough to crack. A nurse approached Aaliyah first. "Name?" "Aaliyah," she whispered. "Last name?" She hesitated. "Just Aaliyah." The nurse paused for half a second, that kind of pause Aaliyah knew all too well, then scribbled something quick on the chart and moved on. No smile, no warmth. Brooke stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger. "Make sure you check her thoroughly. She might have been the one who caused all this." Aaliyah's eyes widened. "I didn't." Brooke cut her off. "You saved him? Really? Or did you panic when he didn't drown fast enough?" The nurse stiffened, unsure how to respond. Ryan struggled to speak. "Brooke, stop. She didn't hurt me." "Then explain why she was right there when it happened." Brooke snapped. Aaliyah looked down at her trembling hands. "I was on the walkway. I saw him slip. I ran because no one else did." The nurse finally stepped between them. "Ma'am, please let us do our job." Brooke scoffed but stepped back, muttering under her breath. Unbelievable. Aaliyah was guided into a small exam room. The door closed, muting the chaos outside. The nurse cut the fabric around her injured leg, revealing a deep gash. Aaliyah winced as disinfectant stung the wound. "How did this happen?" the nurse asked. "The river," Aaliyah whispered. "And the rocks." The nurse glanced toward the door. "You're lucky you made out." Aaliyah nodded, but luck had never felt farther away. Moments later, Ryan was wheeled into the room across the hall. Aaliyah could hear fragments of conversation through the cracked door, his raspy voice trying to explain, Brooke constantly interrupting, insisting something darker had happened. The doctor stepped out and addressed both women. "She saved him," he said firmly. "There's no sign of struggle, no sign of harm." Brooke's face twitched, her jaw locked, her eyes burned, but the truth hanging in the air meant nothing to her, because to people like Brooke, facts didn't matter, only assumptions did. And Aaliyah had the wrong face, the wrong clothes, the wrong life for someone who deserved to be believed. Aaliyah sat on the exam bed, her leg wrapped in fresh bandages, the sting fading but the humiliation still burning under her skin. She stared at the floor, trying to steady her breath. Saving a man's life shouldn't have felt this lonely. The door clicked open softly. Ryan stepped inside, now dry, wrapped in a navy sweater that belonged in magazines. His breathing was steadier, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. "Hey," he said quietly. Aaliyah looked up. You're not supposed to walk yet." He offered a tired smile. "I've been through worse. And I didn't want you sitting here alone." She blinked, surprised. No one had ever said that to her, not with that tone. Brooke slipped in behind him, arms folded, eyes sharp. "Ryan, you need rest." "Not this." He ignored her completely. He walked closer to Aaliyah's bed, lowering himself carefully into the chair beside her. "You saved me," he said, voice low. "I meant what I said outside. I wouldn't be here if not for you." Aaliyah swallowed. "I just did what anyone would do." Brooke scoffed. "Anyone? Girls like you don't just help." "Ryan, she could've." He cut her off. Enough. The room stilled. Brooke's eyes widened, not in fear, but in disbelief. Ryan never raised his voice. Not to her. Not to anyone. Aaliyah shifted, uncomfortable. You don't have to defend me. Yes, he said gently, I do. For a moment, Brooke said nothing. Then her voice dropped into a whisper edged with venom. Do you even know anything about her? Ryan turned back to Aaliyah. Do you have someone I can call? A guardian? Parent? She shook her head. No, I just go where I can. Brooke's lips curled. See? You don't know what you're inviting into your life. Ryan glared at her. She pulled me out with a cut in her leg and freezing water in her lungs. That's all I need to know. Aaliyah looked away, her chest tight. People didn't talk about her like that. Not in defense. Not with respect. Ryan leaned closer. Can I ask you something? Yeah. When I slipped, you ran without thinking. Why? Aaliyah hesitated. Because no one else did. Something in Ryan's expression cracked. A mix of guilt and awe. Brooke saw it too. And for the first time, she realized she was losing control of this moment. Because the girl she tried to break was becoming the one person Ryan actually listened to. As Ryan reached for his phone to silence a buzzing alert, Aaliyah noticed a silver emblem on the back, a symbol she'd only ever seen in news clips about powerful executives and government-level security. He wasn't just rich. He was someone whose world people like her never touched. If you believe talent can silence every insult, share this video. And to everyone watching from the US, UK, and Canada, your voice matters. Aaliyah tried not to stare at the emblem, but it drew her eyes like gravity. Sharp edges, eagle wings, metallic ink that shimmered under the hospital lights. She'd seen it before on screens and electronic store windows, usually on devices held by men in suits. Ryan tucked the phone away quickly, almost too quickly. Brooke saw Aaliyah looking and stepped in front of him, blocking the view. That's none of your business, she snapped. Ryan sighed. Brooke, please. No, she hissed. She doesn't need to know anything. Aaliyah frowned. I wasn't trying to pry. Ryan lifted his hand gently. It's okay. He glanced at Brooke, then back at Aaliyah, the kind of look someone gives when they're tired of pretending. You know those tech tablets everyone uses in schools now? He asked softly. Aaliyah nodded. Yeah, the ones with the blue logo on the side. That's mine, he said. My company designed them. The security systems, too. Her eyes widened. Not because he was rich, she already guessed that, but because it meant he wasn't just wealthy. He was the type of man whose decisions shaped people's lives. Brooke stepped forward, her voice icy. You don't need to impress her, Ryan. She doesn't care about your background. She just... Brooke, he said quietly. I'm explaining because she deserves to know who helped her as much as she helped me. Aaliyah's breath hitched. No one talked like that about her. Not with that much sincerity. Ryan leaned back against the chair. I stepped away from the company a while ago after my son died. Haven't been around crowds, meetings, people. I go to the river when I need quiet. Aaliyah's voice softened. I am sorry. He nodded once, eyes hollow but gentle. Everyone thinks money makes you safe, but it doesn't protect you from the things you carry. Silence stretched, heavy but honest. Aaliyah shifted. I didn't mean to see your phone. I just noticed things. Brooke scoffed. Of course she did. But Ryan didn't laugh. He looked at Aaliyah the way someone looks at a puzzle piece they didn't realize they needed. You're observant, he said. Most people miss that emblem completely. Aaliyah shrugged lightly. I've had to notice things to survive. Ryan smiled, tired but real. That's a talent people overlook. Brooke stared, stunned, because in that moment it was clear the drowned man wasn't just alive. He was finally listening to someone other than her. Aaliyah sat quietly as the nurse adjusted her bandages one last time. Her skin still burned where Brooke's slap had landed, but the sting felt different now. Not just pain, but a reminder that she wasn't imagining the cruelty she'd faced. The door opened, and a hospital supervisor stepped inside. His badge glinted under the light. Miss Aaliyah, he said politely, I need to ask you a few questions. Aaliyah straightened. Brooke's eyes narrowed. Ryan watched intently. We reviewed the entrance footage. The supervisor continued. It shows you limping in, soaked, with a deep cut on your leg. He flipped the tablet toward Brooke, and it shows you striking her. Brooke's face drained of color. That doesn't prove anything, she stuttered. She could have hurt Ryan. She could have. Ryan cut her off. Brooke, stop. But Brooke didn't. She stepped toward the supervisor, voice shaking. You don't understand the kind of people who pretend to help. Ryan's voice rose, not loud, but heavy enough to stop her mid-sentence. She saved my life. Brooke froze. He stood, breathing slow but steady. She jumped in the moment I slipped. No hesitation. No agenda. She dragged me out with one leg bleeding and still kept going. And while I could barely breathe, his eyes locked on Brooke. You slapped her. The supervisor nodded. Our staff saw that too. Brooke's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Ryan turned to Aaliyah. I'm sorry for everything that happened after you saved me. You deserve gratitude, not this. For the first time, Aaliyah looked him in the eyes and saw no fear, no confusion, no hidden panic. Just clarity. The supervisor addressed Brooke calmly. Ma'am, the hospital requires a formal written statement from you, and you may be asked to leave the premises until this is resolved. Brooke's voice cracked. Ryan, you're choosing her over me? Ryan shook his head slowly. I'm choosing the truth. Aaliyah inhaled deeply, her heart pounding. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted the world to see what really happened. Ryan stepped closer to her bed. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'll make sure you get home safe, or wherever you need to go. Aaliyah swallowed hard. I don't really have a home. Brooke threw her hands up. See? This is what I meant. She wants something. No, Ryan said firmly. She didn't ask for a thing. For a moment, the room fell silent, because for the first time all day, the person with the least power finally had someone standing beside her. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. Someone finally believed Aaliyah. The late afternoon light filtered through the hospital blinds, soft and warm, painting thin golden stripes across Aaliyah's blanket. For the first time since the river, since the slap, since the accusations, she felt her muscles relax. Not from comfort, but from finally being seen. Ryan stepped back into the room, no longer escorted by nurses or staff. He moved slower now, not because his body was weak, but because his mind carried the weight of everything that had just happened. Aaliyah sat up a little straighter. You didn't have to come back, she said quietly. He shook his head. Yes, I did. Brooke was nowhere in sight. The hallway was silent. The chaos had faded with her footsteps. Ryan pulled a chair closer to her bedside. You saved me, he said again, softer this time. And I want to make sure you're okay, not just today, but after this. Aaliyah looked down at her hands. They were small, wrapped in clean gauze now, not mud and riverweed. I don't know what after looks like, she admitted. I just go with whatever comes. You deserve more than whatever comes, Ryan said. You deserve a chance to feel safe. She blinked, unsure how to respond. People didn't offer her safety. They offered warnings, blame, doors that stayed shut. Ryan continued, I know what it feels like to lose your footing, to not know where life goes next. After my son, everything stopped making sense. Aaliyah hesitated. I'm sorry. I didn't know. He gave a faint smile. Most people don't. I don't really talk about him. But today, something changed. Maybe saving me wasn't just about pulling me out of the water. She exhaled slowly. What was it about? Reminding me that people still care. Aaliyah didn't trust her voice enough to answer. She just nodded. Ryan rose slightly and offered his hand. Not for shaking, not for formality. Just a simple gesture of honesty. You don't have to decide anything big right now, he said. But if you ever need help, a place to stay, someone to call, I'll be there. Aaliyah stared at his hand. No one had ever offered her something that wasn't conditional. No one had ever spoken to her without expecting something in return. She placed her hand in his. It was small inside his, but steady. Thank you. she said, voice finally firm. "For believing me." Ryan nodded once. "It's the least you deserved." As he stepped toward the doorway, the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow across the floor, like the beginning of something instead of the end. Aaliyah leaned back against the pillow. Her leg still hurt, her cheek still burned, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. Subscribe for more stories where justice finally speaks.